Hello, universe. This is Allfire, and this is my first post on YouTube. I don't really know why I picked this particular video to respond to, but I guess you gotta start somewhere. So, without further ado, here is my rebuttal. To begin with, I am an atheist. An atheist being anyone who does not believe in God. By that definition, an agnostic is an atheist, but not necessarily all atheists are agnostic. With regards to there being a so-called higher power in the universe, I think most atheists, myself included, kind of flip-flop between atheism and what you might call agnosticism. That's one of the nice things about having an open mind, is that you can change it from time to time. But whatever, this is really just a semantics argument, and those aren't very productive. The word atheist can mean different things to different people, just like the word God. To me, the term atheist is really just a convenient label people use to signify themselves as, or to refer to people who don't subscribe to a theology, or who don't believe in any concept of God that they've ever heard. And really, when I describe myself as an atheist, I'm just identifying myself as a man of science, as someone who uses logic and reason to make sense of the universe in which I live, as opposed to some story that was made up hundreds or thousands of years ago, or even one that was written in the 50s by a sci-fi author. I don't know that I can prove that God doesn't exist. There are so many definitions of the word God. Some of them, most of them, probably yours, can be proven false. Most of them can be disproven easily, including the Judeo-Christian Islamic version of God, which I suspect you're talking about. The bottom line, I don't have to prove that God doesn't exist not to believe that there is one. Now I want to talk a little bit about the scientific method. To begin with, it works more or less exactly the opposite of the way that you've described it. Plenty of statements can be proven positively, and science has a fairly strict criteria for what constitutes a valid proof. Any statement that hasn't been proven is a hypothesis or a conjecture at best, and the statement God does exist isn't even a scientifically valid conjecture, because there is no statement that could be made that would disprove it. A proof, in the pure sense, is simply a mathematical construct. If the proof is valid, then the truth contained in it is absolute. And from these proofs, from logic, we can attain some amount of absolute knowledge. I know absolutely, without question, for example, that all positive integers are greater than 0. It simply cannot be any other way. Some people contend that logic is meaningless because man's sense of reason is flawed. There may be some truth to that, but at the same time, our sense of reason does allow us to know some things with absolute certainty. The power of logic itself is in fact absolute. It is inviolable even by God. The Pythagorean theorem, which has been proven many times over, using many different methods, states simply that the square of the hypotenuse of a right triangle is equal in length to the sum of the squares of its two remaining sides. Not even an all-powerful, almighty God could create a triangle that violates this rule. Just as even a God with infinite power couldn't distribute 20 balls into 19 buckets without putting at least 2 balls in one bucket. He could materialize a 20th bucket out of nothingness, or send the 20th ball into oblivion, but if he's going to play by the rules, then at least 2 of those balls are going in one bucket. It can be no other way. You see, even God has to follow the rules. Even God is subordinate to a higher power. Now, starting with simple proofs, like the proof of the Pythagorean theorem, or any one of dozens of other simple mathematical proofs, these proofs can be combined to form more complicated proofs, proofs of a more advanced concept. Kepler's conjecture, which has to do with how closely you can pack spheres into a finite space, is hundreds of pages long, all composed of simpler proofs. It is this absolute power of logic in which I put my faith as an atheist. Now, on to Chinese gold. To prove that there's no gold in China, you say you would have to conduct an exhaustive search of all of China, which really just isn't practical, China being a pretty big place. But that may not necessarily be true. If you could prove, for example, that gold can only exist in the mountains, and that there were no mountains in China, we would know that there is no gold there. You could also do it by proving that there is no such thing as gold. If gold doesn't exist anywhere, then once again, there is no gold in China. Also, dude, Chinaman is not the proper nomenclature. Asian American, please. Let's take another statement. Let's say that there's no oil on the moon. If we can prove that oil comes from the remains of living things, and that there have never been living things on the moon, then we know that there's no oil there, and that the statement is true. I don't really know whether we can actually prove that right now, but that is an example. I think the main obstacle to proving that there's no gold in China is the fact that there is plenty of gold in China, which makes the statement patently false. You went on to say that you would scientifically prove that God exists, but then provided no proof, no evidence of any kind, nothing really except perhaps an argument that God might possibly exist. But you really didn't go any further than that. You said that to prove that God does not exist, or that there was no gold in China, we would need mountains of evidence, which in the first case we actually have. But to prove that God does exist, you would need only a single golden sliver of evidence, which nobody's been able to provide. Why? There is none, because there is gold in China, and there is no God, right? In closing, I guess I would like to ask you a question. I would like to ask, are you a Christian? If you answered yes, then really your answer is no. Since there is no proof of God's existence, I guess that makes you an agnostic too, right?